Oh boy, alright, we're back at this again. Disney Plus Star Wars has been a bit of a mixed bag with a complicated mess of announced then canceled shows, and even when we have gotten one of those things released, more often than not, it's landed as one of the weakest Star Wars properties we've gotten to date. Even with the masterpiece that is Andor. And oh boy, I could gush about Andor all day long. To balance everything out, I don't think it's controversial to say that things were better for Star Wars, at the very least on television, before the property was being used to launch and incentivize subscribing to yet another streaming platform. Dave Filoni had us on the right track from about 2008 to 2018. We all know how great The Clone Wars is, and I'm a big fan of Rebels too. I genuinely consider that series to be some of the best Star Wars, period. Just as incredible as anything Dave Filoni did with Clone Wars. And I'll gladly extend that praise to the character of Ahsoka Tano. I literally grew up, came into maturity watching Ahsoka mature and become one of the great Jedi characters in all of Star Wars. Hell, even when the character made the leap to live action, yeah, I admit I was a little ambivalent about the idea of recasting her, worried about something being ruined in that transition between mediums, but when Rosario Dawson showed up in The Mandalorian, I thought she killed it. Even in her little Book of Boba Fett cameo, as stupid as it is that another show was hijacking that one, Dawson wasn't doing anything wrong, and she was clearly comfortable stepping into Ashley Eckstein's shoes. So now we have Ahsoka, Dave Filoni's baby, the thing that he's been working on forever and trying to get us all excited about. Or at least, we have the first 2 episodes of it. And... Okay, hold on. I was rooting for this series, and I'm not even fully sure how I feel about it, given I've only seen the first 2 episodes. But this thing needs more. It needs to pick up a whole lot of steam with the time it has left. Again, I'm a Rebels fan. I want to see these characters and storylines continue in a compelling way, and in turn, I want Ahsoka to succeed. But after the first 2 episodes, I can't say Ahsoka left me feeling much of anything. So far, the series feels like The Force Awakens for Rebels fans, a continuation that desires a new audience, but is also deeply entrenched in the mythology of what came before. Now, it's not so bad if you have to catch up on 3 movies to understand a 30-plus year-on continuation, but between Clone Wars, Rebels, Mando, Book of Boba Fett, Tales of the Jedi, there are like 230 episodes of television waiting for you to dive in. And I would argue that if you have never watched an episode of Clone Wars or Rebels, at least watching a detailed recap is necessary in order to follow Ahsoka coherently. And I'm not saying the show should be a soft reboot instead, that Ahsoka's previous appearances shouldn't have bearing on their own series. That would be artistically unsatisfying. I think it's the right approach in getting us reacclimated with these characters, with how things have changed since we saw them in Rebels, how the Galactic Civil War has affected them. But the show lingers far too long on Rebels iconography and Easter eggs, but we don't really need to see all of it, or more aptly, linger in it for so goddamn long, because it just feels at times like we're wandering through a memory hall. These things exist to catch up people who weren't there for the other shows. Well, that and it's easy fan service, albeit far less egregious than what we've seen in Mando, but nevertheless. And I get it, because you want to bring in a new audience, you want to get them excited about Ahsoka, but I almost would have respected the show more if they had played to their core audience. There are still 6 more episodes of Ahsoka for me to watch before I can really know how I feel about it. But so far, it feels a little hollow, like it's caught between 2 worlds, one where it's continuing off of Rebels and is made for the show's fans regardless of how much of its newcomers will connect with, and another where it gets to have its cake and eat it too, holding the hand of new viewers to make sure they feel at home with the longtime devotees of Ahsoka Tano's story. I saw these 2 episodes in a theater, mind you, and it was uproarious. I mean, the Rebels fans were having an amazing time, but I just need a little more from the remaining episodes before I get there. And on the subject of amazing movie-going experiences, let me tell you about popcorn, the secret sauce behind many of your favorite movies. No, I don't mean the delicious kernels popped at your local concession stand. I'm talking about Popcorn, a leading platform in audience market research who have crafted experiences that connect filmmakers directly to their audiences. Popcorn's unique platform lets movie lovers help movie makers shape the films of tomorrow, and now it's bringing The Exorcist Believer to life. This sequel to the late great William Friedkin's iconic horror masterpiece, The Exorcist, is generating so much anticipation online. I mean, have you seen that trailer? I'm super stoked for it, especially being a big David Gordon Green fan and what he did with the Halloween movies. But more importantly, Popcorn is hosting an exclusive event for the film with only 3,000 tickets available, which, as you can imagine, typically gets snapped up within a day or two. So you're gonna wanna act fast on this if you wanna participate in the exclusive event, especially because if you're a horror fan or a fan of The Exorcist or really just a movie fan in general, you might be getting a sneak peek at some exclusive footage from The Exorcist Believer, making this a must-attend event. So what do you need to attend? Well, a little more than the passion for movies you already have, which I assume if you're watching this channel, you enjoy movies, so this is perfect for you. Seriously, it's an absolutely free event. It's a really cool thing that's not just a movie, it's a dialogue between fans and the people that bring movies like The Exorcist Believer to us. Attendees have a genuine opportunity to shape movie making with their voice, immersing themselves in the Hollywood creative process. And what's even better is participants have a chance to win. And what could you possibly be winning? Well, there are going to be 2 $100 Amazon gift cards up for grabs. Seriously, I don't know how this could possibly get any better. You have an opportunity to maybe see some exclusive footage from an upcoming highly anticipated release, and you could also win $100 in Amazon gift cards. Like, this is just, it's a dream. I'd be doing this if I could. Seriously, guys, this isn't just another ad spot or whatever. This is something that I thought was pretty cool and that you all would benefit from, because I mean, as a movie lover myself, I'd be all over this thing. So make sure you check out the link in the description down below to sign up for your place in the Exorcist Believer exclusive event hosted by Popcorn. And thank you so much to Popcorn for sponsoring this video. I think my biggest issue with Ahsoka so far, really the issue from which most if not all of my other issues stem, is its pacing. Now, I don't mind slow burn sci-fi. I really love the Blade Runner-esque crawl at the start in the Return of the Jedi red text. I know that's a minor detail to focus on, but it really set the mood, paired with Kevin Kiner's incredible score, which is undoubtedly the MVP of these first 2 episodes of the entire series so far. These 2 episodes which followed feel like the first act of a movie, but it almost has the opposite problem of something like The Mandalorian, or really most of Disney Plus's live action shows. Usually the episodes of these shows have been way too short and move ungracefully fast, constantly rushed with little in the way of character moments, except for Andor, of course. Scenes hardly get a chance to breathe, and there's no real sense of direction. It doesn't feel like actual television. Andor didn't have this problem thanks to the brilliant writing of our Lord and Savior Tony Gilroy. Ahsoka doesn't either, but I would say it's overcorrected in the opposite direction. It almost feels too lethargic in its pace. Scenes are allowed to breathe, sure, but then the characters take another breath and lay around for a minute while we're sitting here waiting to get to the next beat. It makes the proceedings drag on and on to the point where a 50-minute episode feels like it's an hour and a half, and the hour and a half 2-episode premiere feels like it's a 3-hour movie. Again, I appreciate a more delicate pace, something akin to the classic samurai films this show is clearly inspired by, and that George Lucas himself took inspiration from when creating the Jedi in Star Wars. But I wish Dave livened the pace a bit, or at least did something interesting with the camera, lighting, editing to let these longer moments not feel so stagnant. We don't need to see, for example, every single step Ahsoka needs to take to turn pillars, or Sabine turning an object in hand and trying every single possible permutation until she gets it right all in one shot. it just becomes so boring and uninteresting. Those are the moments where I feel Dave Filoni's inexperience as a director. And that's kind of a fault of the story, too. It's focusing on the wrong things, especially in the case of Sabine, who, for the first 2 episodes, is just sort of moping and wandering about through Rebels nostalgia. And I think there are more interesting avenues we could explore there. From what I saw of her and her relationship with Ahsoka, how she's dealing with the loss of Ezra and the breaking up of her found family, there's something compelling there, and the show's just taking a little too long to start tapping into. She's not sure she feels worthy of training under Ahsoka, and also doesn't think Ahsoka wants her help in the mission. She's dealing with a lot of self-doubt, and I'm interested in it, but it just feels a little monotonous and really pads the runtime. That's sort of another big issue I have. Dave Filoni as a director. Look, I know I've criticized Filoni on this channel a lot as of late, and I really hate doing so because I genuinely think he's a great guy, and he also just so happens to be the genius behind some of my favorite Star Wars ever. And I also think he gets and understands the lore, history, mythology of this world better than anyone else outside of George Lucas and our Lord and Savior Tony Gilroy. But just because he can be a resourceful creative lead doesn't mean that he possesses the auteurist vision of a director behind the camera. I just don't think his live-action filmmaking is up to snuff to where it needs to be for a series like this. Look at the difference between episode 1 and 2. I'm not saying that episode 2 is a drastic step up in the filmmaking department by any means, but it's clear that Steph Green, who I could have sworn I read as Seth Green when the credits rolled, which that would have been interesting, has directed this kind of stuff before, has directed television, and understands that we don't need to see every single action a character does in one shot before moving on to the next scene. You can cut around it, make the series of actions feel a bit more interesting, ramp up tension, make it more dynamic, snappier. You can showcase different angles, use light in interesting ways. Dave simply doesn't do this. And I get it's a very unobtrusive way of filmmaking. I see how these scenes would look in an animated setting because I've seen them in an animated setting before. But when what the characters are doing is so mundane and the actual shots aren't giving me any sort of emotional resonance because the characters themselves are so overly stoic throughout, it just doesn't really work for me. You add that up with the pacing issues, and by the time it ends and you look back at the time it took to get the point of the episode across, it was simply way too long, and not to the benefit of the characters or the story being told either. It drags. On top of all of that, the acting is just far too stiff. Mary Elizabeth Winstead and the late great Ray Stevenson are the only real standouts here for me. Mary's allowed to have a lot more charisma and personality and brings Hera to life in a way that translates from animated to live action seamlessly. Like, I couldn't get over actually how well she tapped into the core of that character, and her being this mediator between Ahsoka and Sabine, like, she just got it, nailed it. And Rey is making a meal out of crumbs, adding a lot of nuance to what looks to be a far more complex character than simply an antagonist. And again, it's not like we're getting a lot from his character in these first 2 episodes, but especially the conversation he has with his apprentice towards the end of episode 2, there's a lot to unpack there that I don't think would have been there had we not had an actor as incredible as Ray Stevenson delivering those lines and tapping into the emotionality of the character. There's honestly a conflict within this guy that I'm really curious to explore. But when it comes to Ahsoka and Sabine, I've generally come to like Rosario Dawson's interpretation of Ahsoka on the other 2 shows, but so far this show is highlighting why she worked as a secondary character in those shows and not a primary one. There are a lot of exchanges, now that she's the central focus, where I kinda just want Ashley back, or at least Rosario to be directed in a way that gives me something, anything. I get that Ahsoka's a loner and has gone through a lot. I get that the same is sort of true with Sabine, but The way they're being directed here crafts performances that come off drier than a desert. I get what Dave is trying to do here. He's trying to channel the quieter, more mature, cerebral even, and serious episodes from the latter seasons of Rebels and Clone Wars. Think of all the Mortis stuff. And the performances are meant to be in service of that. I just don't think it's translating to live action nearly as well. It's making for something only a fraction as interesting as when a similar approach was taken in those shows. Not to mention, there's just an unnatural, awkwardly slow cadence to the dialogue that further emphasizes all of the issues we've been discussing here. I mean, I get that Dave Filoni loves the prequels. I love the prequels too. But I don't know, maybe you shouldn't be trying so hard to emulate the Phantom Menace in a lot of these scenes. There's a reason that movie feels kind of stiff. And this show feels stiff in the same way the Phantom Menace does, except, at least so far, it just doesn't have the excitement that film is able to weave in. I gotta say, too, the visual effects, while a generally impressive balance between the volume and green screen and much better looking than something like The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan, still looks incredibly concrete. There's no color or vibrance, and it makes the whole thing even more dull. And it's not like this is the visual effects themselves. This is probably some of the most premium and cinematic visual effects we've gotten in a show like this, of course outside of Andor, but the general aesthetic, the tone of it all is just not doing the actual work any favors. Again, I get what Filoni might be trying to do here, to create an aesthetic and atmosphere that plays into the grayness of these characters and the trauma or baggage they're still carrying with them. But not every planet needs to look like the embodiment of drywall. That goes for the fights as well. I appreciate the slower, more methodical pace akin to samurai duels, where the emphasis is on timing, precision, and reading your opponent. But it's just not filmed in a way that gets you invested or excited. I know many have praised the action so far, specifically the lightsaber duels, and that's great. Maybe I'll catch on, but at least for right now, I'm just not there. There's that clip that's been circulating around showing Ahsoka dueling one of the bad guys and a Jedi assassin droid, and it's rightfully been getting a lot of flack for how Ahsoka's movements lack any real punch or weight because they're trying so hard to do it all for real. But the version that this Twitter user did, where they enhanced the visual effects, added some motion blur, sped up the strikes, and ramped the killing blow, was, simply put, 100 times better. You felt the velocity of the swings, the swiftness of Ahsoka as a master swordsman. It was a perfect translation of her attack moves from the animated series, but adapted for live action. It also perfectly enhanced the lightsabers. They were vibrant, slightly fuzzy due to the motion blur. It was just all shaped around a much more interesting fight to watch. And it's not like this guy changed up the angles or fundamentally reshaped the scene. He simply did slight visual effects embellishments to enhance what was already captured in camera. The way Star Wars has been using VFX is just so bizarre to me. They don't seem to understand when to use VFX as a tool for enhancement, while simultaneously relying on something like the volume or de-aging almost religiously to a fault. This is a fantasy world where people swing fucking laser swords around. There is no need to ground it in our reality. Part of what's so exciting about the duels in the prequels is that they are so over the top. You get a sense of the power on display, and it's a fucking blast. And yeah, I think it's cool that we're at a point where Star Wars can use an actual, extendable, mostly realistic lightsaber for these fights, but outside of selling replicas at Galaxy's Edge, I don't really see the benefit. They look and feel like physical swords, not sci-fi weaponry. I kinda love how stylized they used to feel. It gives the whole thing a bit of a fan film tinge. Alright, those are my big criticisms. So far, I know it sounds like I don't like this show at all, but I do think the tide could shift, and it's important to remember that we're only 25% of the way through this thing as well. I see a lot of potential in the characters and what we know of their motivations so far. I like the concept of how they're tackling a reluctant master and reluctant apprentice. I think Ahsoka and Sabine have a lot more in common than they realize, with Sabine being a nice reflection of a younger Ahsoka, namely the version of Ahsoka we saw towards the end of Clone Wars, who had given up and walked away from the Jedi Order. I also think it's very interesting to imply that Ahsoka has abandonment issues because of her relationship with Anakin and the Jedi, and how they both betrayed her, scorned her, and caused her to trust no one but herself. So it makes sense that when she tried to take on another Padawan, and that Padawan was struggling as Sabine apparently did, there'd be a falling out, and Ahsoka would go it alone. I expect some sort of self-reckoning between Ahsoka and her role as a mentor, some kind of acceptance that she has to have faith in others sometimes and can't just go everything alone. As far as Sabine is concerned, after all this time, she's still reeling from the fallout of the end of Rebels, of losing Ezra and the rest of her found family. The Galactic Civil War has taken a lot from her, but she still wants to try and find a way to bring Ezra back, while Ahsoka presumably wants to do the same, but also track down and kill Grand Admiral Thrawn. I want to see where that goes, and obviously the notion that we're gonna see Thrawn in live action is just delicious, as long as they don't screw it up, but that remains to be seen. And while we don't get much from Ray Stevenson and his apprentice, it's pretty clear that they're former Jedi who still believe in the traditions and yet have lost faith in restoring what was, pledging their allegiance instead to what is now and what will allow them to have power. There's an air of tragedy to that. And again, maybe the credit is due to Ray Stevenson more than the writing. I've been hooked by that particular storyline and think it's off to a great start. I also think it's a nice contrast between the master-apprentice relationship of those two and Ahsoka and Sabine. I do think it's kind of hilarious how the droid, played by David Tennant, has more personality and liveliness to him than either Ahsoka or Sabine. There's an overall through line of not being able to let the past die, whether it's with Sabine holding on to Ezra, Ahsoka trying to destroy Thrawn to ensure the end of the Empire, the Night Sister Morgan pledging herself to that which will make her powerful and challenging Ahsoka out of revenge from their fight back in Mando Season 2, which it didn't even register for me until I saw someone say it online, which is wild. And this idea of people changing with the time, the importance of learning from what was in order to better yourself. All of these people who were once under Imperial rule don't have to remain loyal, but they've dedicated so much of their lives to this thing only to have it be defeated, as we see at the manufacturing place in episode 2. It makes sense why there would be small little insurgencies around the New Republic, and there would be an effort to rebuild the Empire on the idea of a long-lost Imperial admiral who can come in as their savior. They're looking to whoever they can in order to rebuild what was, instead of learning from their mistakes and evolving. Because, fascism and Imperial rule isn't so chill. It's kind of like what happened with Ahsoka and the Jedi Order. When she learned that the very institution she devoted her life towards wasn't what she thought it was, she decided to leave to outrun it instead of trying to change it. And when she learned of the collapse of the Jedi Order, she continued to drift. Ahsoka may have been able to move on from the crumbling institution she once believed in, but she also lost her way a bit until she found Luke and had her faith restored. I guess that also started with finding Sabine and Ezra, remnants of old. She found her new hope. However, I'd argue the reason she failed with Sabine the first go-around was because she succumbed to the old ways of the Jedi, of having a master do everything themselves and holding back their Padawans. She's still a product of those old traditions, but this time, when Sabine decides she wants to finish her training, Ahsoka knows it's different. It's a mutual collaboration between teacher and student, and it's worth noting that in the scene where Ahsoka and Sabine talk on the deck of Ahsoka's ship, Ahsoka is confronted with the same rebellious version of her younger self and isn't really sure how to handle it. But most of all, she doesn't want Sabine's help more than she needs it. It's not worth her time, she'll just do it herself. There's a feeling on Sabine's end that she isn't wanted and she wants to do things her way, while Ahsoka is still trying to control everything as she sees fit. And we know where we've seen that before with Anakin and Obi-Wan, and it's really cool to see this through line of masters trying to help their apprentices, but not really being sure how to be a master themselves. It's as much a learning process for the master as it is the apprentice, and I like how Ahsoka is kind of hinting at where it will go with that. I think the show could have gotten us here quicker, but I do like that the story brought us here regardless. So what's to come for Ahsoka? I think in the remaining episodes, Ahsoka will still have to learn to move on from the old ways, even though she thinks she's so radically different. And maybe she is to an extent. She's kind of a Ronin, going it alone, but she's also afraid of failing or repeating the past because of everything she's witnessed. I can get behind the direction they're going here, even if it's probably not going to resonate with non-Rebels fans. But since I am a Rebels fan, I dig it. We aren't playing games trying to figure out where this whole thing is going. It truly does feel like it'll wind up being one long story broken up into 8 parts. Here's hoping there's no filler. Please, for the love of God, no heist episode. Just please, let every episode serve a purpose. I think it's also clear that Ahsoka, the character, is also dealing with the guilt of not being there to help save Anakin, her mentor, from turning to the dark side. I'm sure this is something she'll be forced to confront at some point. Some things are destined to be what they are, and now that Anakin is gone, there's an even greater potential battle that exists for Ahsoka to find closure, a more difficult challenge than any sort of lightsaber duel could possibly pose. And the show likely won't go here, given there are only 8 episodes to work within, but the way it's using Thrawn as a mythic figure poised to save the Imperial remnants from the New Republic isn't too dissimilar from how the Resistance was hoping to use Luke Skywalker to save them from the First Order, and what a lot of fans expected from him in The Last Jedi. It would be really cool to see the series explore the corrosive effects of hero worship, of losing your sense of purpose and trying to place it onto a figurehead that's going to save you, and looking to these figures as leaders instead of taking matters into your own hands, instead of manifesting your own destiny. That might constitute too many moving pieces, but I think I'd welcome it if the show went there. Let me just reiterate, I do not hate Ahsoka so far, and I think there is a lot that could happen to elevate it massively. I just find these first 2 episodes so underwhelming after so much hype. Yes, episode 2 is good. There are glimmers of greatness in episode 1, specifically the beginning. I really like the introduction of the villains. Yes, Sabine gets much better in episode 2, even if she's just kind of wandering around Rebels memory lane for a bit. And I haven't given up on the series yet, but as a series premiere, it's not all that attention-grabbing or impactful. There's a difference between being wistful and overly nostalgic. That's fun, and I'm happy for all my fellow Rebels fans, but if that's all that awaits me for the rest of the show, it's gonna become tiresome. But I'm still gonna give it a shot. Dave Filoni, I'm still gonna put some faith in you. I'm gonna take a lesson out of Ahsoka's playbook, and I'm gonna have my faith restored, hopefully. Please, God, do it.
I got a bad feeling about this.